Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do a book haul for the month of July. I can't believe we're at the end of July, but it is what it is. Time constantly moves. And I don't know what happened this month, but I have a lot of books to talk to you about. Like a lot of books. I didn't count because I didn't want to. There's just a giant pile just out of camera, kind of creeping into camera over here. And usually, if I have a big spike in my book haul in July, it's because June is my birthday month, and sometimes people will give me gift cards and things like that to go to independent bookstores. And that didn't happen this year. I will say, though, I think about 5 of these books were sent to me by publishers. So at least I have that. And I just really can't explain why there's been such a spike in my book purchasing in the month of July, but there has. So I've actually attempted to film this video once and was about 35 minutes in and only about halfway through the stack. So I am going to condense my descriptions of these books just a little bit, but I'm still going to describe the book and read a little bit from the opening as we work our way through. That's what I do in all of my book hauls. And I will also say I've read 3 of these books already, which is exciting for me because especially when I have a pile of books this large, it makes me feel better for my future book haul revisit that I've already read 3 of the books. So I'm just going to give myself a little pat on the back for that. And then because I don't want to make this a really long video, we're just going to dive right in. And ordinarily, I will read the entire description from the book because I want to convey to you accurately what the book is about and what the marketing points for it are. I'm going to try to summarize as much as possible. So the first one is Highway 13. This is by Fiona McFarlane, and this is releasing in the month of August from FSG. I don't know the exact date, so I'm pulling it up in front of me. This had been one of my most anticipated books for the rest of 2024. I will link that video down below. And I reached out to FSG, and they were kind enough to send me a finished copy of the book, which is pretty cool. So this will be out August 13th. I will have links to this book and all of the others in the description box down below on bookshop.org. If you want to use those links, like if I spark an interest in these books for you, you can use those, and bookshop.org supports independent bookstores, and those affiliate links also kind of support me just a little bit. So in this case, and in the case of 4 other books, I believe there will be pre-order links down below. So if you follow that link, it will be a pre-order, not an order. So August 13th is when this will be out. This is a short story collection that centers around crime. Like I believe there's a serial killer, but it doesn't really focus on the serial killer. It focuses on the impact of the crimes on the families and other people living in the town where they happened, but it also moves back and forth in time, tells some stories in the years before the crime happened and in the years after. It also deals a little bit with a podcast about the crimes that happens in later years, and I find all of that really fascinating. I struggle with true crime because I find that it can be very lurid and sensationalize the killer in a lot of ways, and I don't like that. I prefer true crime like The Five by Hallie Rubenhold, which is much more about the victims and what their lives were like and the impact of the crime on them and their families. Last Call was another really good one, and it was adapted into a fantastic docuseries on HBO Max. I would highly recommend it. And this seems like it's going to be fiction in the vein of those, where it's really looking at the impact of the crimes and not sensationalizing the criminal at the heart of it. So I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm hoping that I will read it soon. It doesn't look like it's all that long. It's about 254 pages. Here is how this book opens. So it's a story collection, and in the case of story collections, I just read a little bit from the opening of the book. The first story in this collection is Tourists, 2008. Lena Derwent had worked at Mason's for less than a week when they started making fun of her. "Well, hi there, handsome," they said when she was out of sight. "My name is Lena, and I come to you from the 1980s. "She looks like an art teacher," said Gemma from sales. "Don't you think? Kind of over the top, kind of demented." We'll stop there. That's the opening of the first story in Highway 13 by Fiona McFarlane, coming from FSG August 13th, I believe, and I'm really excited about this. I'm excited about all of these books, but you'll probably hear me say that again because it's just, kind of what you do in a book haul. Then there are 3 books from Tin House, which is a smaller publisher that I enjoy following. They published Night of the Living Res by Morgan Talty and his new book, Fire Exit. That is actually how I started following Tin House so closely. So 2 of these books were in my most anticipated books for the rest of 2024, and one of them almost made that list. I just kind of cut it at the end. And when I reached out to Tin House and said, well, am I interested in these 3 books, if you can spare any? And they sent me all 3. So thank you to Tin House. This is a short book. I don't think it's even 200 pages. Yeah, it's 181 pages. It's about a family that is reeling from grief. They get a rabbit to try to help the family focus on something other than their grief. And then I think it's a mother-in-law, an estranged mother of one of the parents comes and breaks the fragile sense of peace. And I admit, anytime an animal is involved, I'm always nervous. Like, what if something happens to the animal? And that is true of this book, but it's a tiny little thing. It sounds really interesting. I have been processing my own grief in recent years because over the last 2 years, I lost 2 grandparents and 2 dogs, and it's been a lot. I talk a lot more about the dogs because people on the channel knew them, but it's been a whole world of grief for varying reasons over the last 2 years. So I'm interested in a book that deals with the processing of that. Here is how this book opens, and then we'll talk about when it is going to be released. The first chapter is called Jin. They found him through an advertisement on Gumtree. For sale, 9-week-old fawn-colored male, Mini Lop, in search of his forever home. Lovely temperament, well-handled, comes with transition feed, nails-trimmed, worm and lice treatment. The breeder was a hairdresser with a husband in the army. She laughed when she told Jin that she had 11 kids of her own, as if having that many children were some kind of joke. Well, that's the opening of The Burrow by Melanie Cheng, which will be released on November 12th, 2024. And again, I'll have links to all of these books on bookshop.org, and in this case, it will be a pre-order link, unless you're watching this after November 12th. But anyway, the next one, also from Tin House, was another one of my most anticipated books for the last part of 2024. And this is the one that was going to be published the furthest out. It is published on December 3rd, 2024, again from Tin House, who, by the way, not only do they have a very strong catalog coming up, really strong cover design, because I'd say these are both really visually stunning books, but in very different ways. And the third book from Tin House, the one that will be next, is also visually striking and in a very different way from both of these books. So this is another story collection and another tiny little thing. It is less than 200 pages, so that's great. I love story collections. I know people sort of struggle with them, but I am a big fan. And I have been thinking that I want to get back to reading more story collections. So hopefully this will be one of the books that helps me get there. These are described as stories about the inner lives of people in Kashmir as they walk the uncertain terrain of their days, fractured from years of war. And then it jumps ahead a little bit, or if I jump ahead a little bit, it's described as an original and powerful debut collection announcing the arrival of a new voice that bears witness to the human condition with nuance, heart, humor, and incredible insight. Really looking forward to this book. Again, December 3rd from Tin House. The first story is called The Bridge, and it opens from the second floor window of the creaky wooden building. Nusrat could see the man's back, his hair, and a shade of his face. She couldn't see the dogs, though, even as they kept on barking. Waiting for the receptionist to call her name, she went on looking out, at the man on the bridge, at the cramped alleyways, at the corrugated roofs of the old houses, at the dark smoke rising from the baker's shop. This was her first time here. A distant cousin had mentioned this clinic a few days ago at a gathering, mourning a relative. I was going mad, the cousin had whispered. She had a 2-year-old daughter now. That is the first story, or the opening of the first story, in The World with Its Mouth Open by Zahid Rafiq. The final book from Tin House is Masquerade by Mike Fu. This was not included. So my original list of books that I was really looking forward to in the last part of 2024 started to get long. So I made some cuts at the very end so the video wouldn't be incredibly long. And this was one of those painful cuts that I made toward the end, but I'm still really looking forward to it. I'm glad that I'm going to be able to talk to you about it here. And again, really beautiful cover from Tin House. This is going to be released on October 29th. And this feels a little bit like a surreal book. That is probably the thing that made me hold back, because I don't know about surreality. Can be great, but it can also kind of go off the rails. Basically, you have this character, Meadow, who goes to house sit for a friend, and weird things start happening. Over the course of a single summer, Meadow must contend with a possibly haunted apartment, a mirror that plays tricks, a stranger speaking in riddles at the bar where he works, as well as a startling revelation about a former lover. And then when Selma, the person he's house sitting for, vanishes from her artist residency, Meadow is forced to question everything he knows about the boundaries between real and imagined as they begin to blur. So, sounds really interesting, and I'm so glad that they sent me this advanced reader's copy. There is a prologue. In most cases, I like to skip the prologue and go to the actual first chapter. So part 1 is called The Looking Glass. And it begins, Shanghai in June is a sweltering continuum of neon and glass, its colors and textures either smudged by gloom or rendered aggressively crisp under the harsh sun. Meadow cocoons himself in his parents' high-rise flat for several days, gently adapting his circadian rhythms to this side of the world. Time is a circle, he thinks whenever he visits. Even though his adolescent years in the city are long past and he sleeps in the guest bedroom of an apartment where he has never lived, there is a kind of primal intimacy in the mundane. He has come to associate the floral coverlet and floor-to-ceiling wardrobe of the bedroom with the tedium and ease of family life. These bland furnishings forgivable in the presence of decades-old knickknacks that his parents have kept since their stateside days in Tennessee. A ceramic incense holder shaped like a rabbit, a Great Smoky Mountains mug crammed full of ballpoint pens, a framed Gustav Klimt print on the wall. That is Masquerade by Mike Fu. Now, I have been wanting to read this book for a while. We're going to take a little break from upcoming books, and after this one and the next one, we'll get back to something that is coming up. This just came out in paperback. It's Do Tell by Lindsay Lynch. I had been curious about this book when it was released. Lindsay Lynch is the book buyer for, or one of the book buyers for Parnassus, which is Ann Patchett's bookstore in Nashville. And Do Tell was released in hardcover around the same time that Tom Lake was, so she actually went on book tour with Ann Patchett. And both of them feature very heavily in the Laydown Diaries videos that they do every Tuesday from Parnassus. So I feel like I've gotten to know her a lot over the course of that, and she's talked about this book a fair amount, obviously. And I had always thought that I was interested in it. It's about old Hollywood. It's described as gossipy, and, you know, I'm super into old Hollywood. And I love that the jacket kind of calls back to old Hollywood posters and designs. That seems really interesting. And when it came out in paperback, I thought to myself, you know, I've been curious about this book for such a long time. I'm going to get a copy from the library. Support your local library, by the way. So I did, and then I read the first chapter, fully thinking to myself that if I was really into the first chapter or two, I would end up ordering the book. And I was really into the first chapter. So I returned the book to the library and ordered a copy from Parnassus, and here it is. This is published by Vintage, and the people from Parnassus are so nice, by the way. It came with this bookmark that has Sparky Van Davender on it and Patchett's previous dog. And when I was talking to the person, the bookseller, they said, well, do you want it to be personalized? And I said, oh, it doesn't have to be personalized, just signed. And they said, well, it really wouldn't be a problem. And I said, well, I just don't want to be a bother. And they said, oh, it's really not a bother. She loves signing the books, and she's actually working today anyway. So I got a personalized signed copy. It says, Greg, let's gossip, Lindsay Lynch. I just find that super fun. So I'm a big fan of that bookstore. And this is about a character actress whose career is waning. Her contract with a major studio is about to end, so she pivots into gossip, writing a gossip column for Hollywood. And there's a bit of a Me Too element, even though it's set way in the past. When a young starlet approaches her after an assault by an A-list actor at a party, Edie helps get the story into print and sets off a chain of events that will alter the trajectories of everyone involved. And then I believe it also deals with complicity in Hollywood and major systems, because in order to get her new career as a gossip columnist off the ground, she sort of needs to be in with Hollywood people. So I believe there's an element of complicity in this as well, which should be fascinating. The first chapter of this was great. And I am kind of thinking that this might be my next book, because I'm really fascinated. It opens, by the way, with a cast of characters. I love books that open with maps, casts of characters, family trees, anything like that. Chapter 1. The last time I saw Charles Landru in Los Angeles, he told me I had gotten everything wrong. everything? I asked him. Everything. It wasn't the first time someone had leveled this accusation against me, and I was certain it wouldn't be the last. Really looking forward to Do Tell by Lindsay Lynch, and I will hopefully be reading it very soon. Housemates by Emma Copley Eisenberg was one of my most anticipated books for the middle of 2024, and I'm just kind of catching up to it. Over the weekend, it's been really hot where I live, so I took Teddy on a road trip to Helena, which is about a 2-hour drive away from us, and where my favorite bookstore, Montana Book Company, is, because the car is air conditioned and Montana Book Company is air conditioned. So it's a fun little excursion that doesn't involve blazing heat for me and for Teddy. So we had such a good time, and everybody played with him, and he was exhausted by the time we got home, which is exactly what he needed, but it also didn't involve getting out into the actual heat. And of course, I got myself a book. So Housemates is published by Hogarth, and I was so excited that they had a copy, and I picked it up, and I was really interested. This is about two people who end up as, roommates, essentially, after an ad, and they end up on a road trip, if I remember correctly. And while they are on that road trip, what ensues is a journey into the heart of the nation, bringing the housemates into conversation with people from all walks of life as they try to make sense of the times they are living in. Along the way, Leah and Bernie discover what it means to chase their own ideas and dreams and to embrace what they are capable of, both romantically and artistically. Warm and insightful, Housemates is a story of youth and freedom, a glorious celebration of queer life, and how art and love might save us all. I mean, I'm someone who is trying to understand the country at this moment, so doing it through fiction with a queer storyline sounds like bliss to me. And I love celebrations of queer life, so I'm super on board with this book, and hopefully I will be able to read it soon. But I could say the same thing about all of these books. And did I mention that this is a massive pile? So it'll be interesting to see how many of these books I do actually get to soon, and which ones I still haven't read in my book haul revisit 1 year from today. I'll link my most recent book haul revisit if you want an example of what I'm talking about. It'll be in the description box down below. Chapter 1. Where I lived then, there was no photography, no movies, no books, no art of any kind. It was enough to make me wonder why I had ever spent so long on it. Art. It had once been my whole day, my whole experience of living. People talk about how time moves slowly, but I had the opposite problem that season, a period of Great Depression that began in 2017 and lasted 3 years. That's the opening of Housemates by Emma Copley Eisenberg. Like every book in this book haul, I am looking forward to reading it. Now we get back to a book that is yet to be released. This is There Are Rivers in the Sky by Elif Shafak. I have a friend who works at Knopf, and they were kind enough to send me this copy of the book. It just says August on the side, so I'm pulling up the date. It's August 20th, 2024. That is when this will be released. And there's only a tiny description on the back, so I will read that. From the voice of a water droplet unfolds a tale spanning centuries, cultures, and continents, all curiously linked by the Epic of Gilgamesh. There Are Rivers in the Sky is a boundless and beautiful novel that braves the complexities of love and loss, memory and erasure, translation and preservation from the internationally best-selling author of The Island of Missing Trees. And that sounds fascinating. This was another one of my most anticipated books for the last part of 2024. I admit I almost put it in the video that has a bit more of a question mark, like, do I want to read these books? Because I do feel like when it comes to Elif Shafak, I want to catch up to 10 minutes, 38 seconds in This Strange World, which was Elif Shafak's shortlisted novel for the Booker Prize. So I feel like there's a barrier for entry for me because I want to catch up to that book before I read any of the two books that Elif Shafak has published since then. But I am still really interested in this book, and I know a lot of other people are as well. So I feel very lucky to have this advanced reader's copy of it. Chapter 1, or Part 1, is called Raindrop, and Chapter 1, By the River Tigris in Olden Times. Later, when the storm has passed, everyone will talk about the destruction it left behind, though no one, not even the king himself, will remember that it all began with a single raindrop. That is There Are Rivers in the Sky by Elif Shafak, publishing in August. Now we get to the first of the books that I have read, Sandwich by Catherine Newman. Now, Ann Patchett has become a full-on book influencer for me, and she talked about this in the Laydown Diaries when it came out, and she actually has a blurb on the front Sandwich is joy in book form. I laughed continuously except for the parts that made me cry. Catherine Newman does a miraculous job reminding us of all the wonder there is to be found in life. This is published by Harper, and I read it. It's a very quick book. I really enjoyed it. And I've had so much fun talking about it with people in the comment sections on my recent videos, because a lot of people have actually read this. And this is a book that felt like it had a very quiet period before it was released. And then as soon as it was published, people started talking about it and reading. And it's been so fun talking about it with people. The protagonist is a woman named Rocky, who can be infuriating. And I think there are definitely people who will read this and not be able to stand her. I kind of enjoyed all of her musings, even though she can be really stubborn. She loves to pick fights, and she can be temperamental and all of those things. She's a very complicated person. I enjoyed her, and I've had conversations in comments with a lot of people who have also enjoyed her. I think she's also tempered by the rest of her family, especially her daughter Willa, who is really good at calling her out when she's going off the rails. It's also a very funny book and a very heartfelt book. So this family has gone to the exact same vacation house every summer for 1 week in Cape Cod. And this year is no exception. But this year is sort of a flex point for the family because the kids are not kids anymore. One of them is in his mid-20s. He has a girlfriend. And Willa, the daughter, is now 20. So there's sort of a question mark about how much longer this annual tradition is going to survive. Not just because the kids are grown up and are going to be starting their own lives, but because Rocky's parents, who always join for at least part of this trip, are elderly, and she's concerned that she's going to lose them sometime soon. And Rocky herself is on the cusp of entering a new stage of life. She's going through menopause, which is a big factor in her journey through the book. And I thought this book was great. It follows the week that they are there, starting with the first full day, which is Saturday, and then Sunday, Monday, all the way through Friday, which is their last full day. The prologue is the only part that's not first person, narrated by Rocky, and then it sort of shifts into that. And the reason I mentioned that specifically is that I think I want to actually do the prologue for this book, because I think it's a better introduction to what the book is than the opening. The first 2 pages are a little cartoonish because there's a toilet overflowing and it's a whole thing. And I think the prologue, even though it's not in the style of the rest of the book, still kind of works. Prologue. Picture this: a shorelined peninsula jutting into the Atlantic Ocean. Zoom in a little closer. It's a Cape Cod beach town. It's midsummer. The narrow highway is thick with lobster dinners and mini golf windmills and inflatable bagel pool floats. But turn off the main drag in either direction and find yourself quickly at the sea. Sandy cliffs and windswept grasses, tumbling pink roses and vast blue skies, and a tide line hemmed with stones and mussels and bright green ruffles of seaweed. Beneath the waves, shivers of great white sharks, stuffed to the gills, or so one imagines, with surfers. And that is Sandwich by Catherine Newman. I read this. I thought it was pretty good. I have really enjoyed talking about it with people as well. I've also read The Coast Road by Alan Murren. I actually just finished this one, and I have not talked about it in a Friday Reads since I finished it. I had only started it when I did my last Friday Reads. Now, this has an interesting trajectory to a book haul because I saw this book in every bookstore I went into in Ireland and Scotland. And I went into a lot of bookstores. And I kept picking it up. And it sounded really interesting to me, but I didn't get it. I kept not getting it. And I think part of it is that it's a hardcover. I think the hardcover is even a little thicker in the UK, but the cover is the same. And I kept thinking I should get other things. And I don't know anybody who's read this. I don't know anything about Alan Murren, so maybe I should just leave it. It sounds interesting, but maybe it's too good to be true. Well, almost as soon as I got home, the book was actually published in the US, and MJ in Canada was the first person who said, I just read a book that I think you would love. It's called The Coast Road by Alan Murren. And I was like, you're kidding me. You're kidding me. And almost immediately, other people started commenting to say, have you read The Coast Road? It sounds really good. And then it popped up in a couple of predictions for what might be on the Booker long list. So I was like, you are kidding me. But luckily, because it had been released in the United States, I was able to get a copy from Montana Book Company. So here it is. And I read it and I really liked it. So I'll talk more about that in my next Friday Reads video. Anyway, this is set in the 1990s in Ireland, which is a very interesting place to set a novel because the Troubles is still going on for one thing, but it's in a bit of a lull. There are talks, like rumblings in the background about discussions about peace accords and things like that. But the Troubles is not the focus of the book, and I don't want to harp on that too much, but just to set you in when this is happening. Ireland was also an extremely conservative and religious country for a long time. And then it very quickly started to pivot away from that. And this is sort of at that flex point where things are changing, but they haven't really changed. And there's an upcoming referendum, or there are talks that there will be an upcoming referendum where people will be able to vote for whether or not divorce should be allowed. And that is the political universe of this book. And then, of course, it tells a much more personal story to really hammer in the political changes that were going on in Ireland. There are a lot of characters that it follows, but it mostly follows Izzy and Colette, who are two women. Colette has left her family, her husband and her sons, to live with a man in Dublin. But now she is back in town and her husband will not allow her to see her sons. Izzy is in a sort of unhappy marriage with a man who has political aspirations, and she is really struggling with trying to find her own agency in the world. And her son has been friends with Colette's son. There's a bit of friction about that right now, but Izzy decides to use her son and Colette's son to help Colette visit her son. That's sort of the inciting incident for the book and where it spirals out from there. I enjoyed this, and I have had great conversations about this one as well with a lot of people. There's a prologue, but I'm skipping over the prologue. We're going to do chapter 1. October 1994. There had been 2 masses already that morning, and the air was thick with incense. The church was packed, and Izzy found herself squeezed between 2 bodies. Each time she went from kneeling to sitting to standing, she felt their shoulders press against hers. She pulled a balled-up tissue from her sleeve and wiped the sweat from her forehead. She thought of removing her woolen jumper, but wasn't sure if the top she had underneath was decent, and besides, she'd never managed the maneuver without hitting the person next to her or exposing some part of her flesh. She didn't think she could suffer an embarrassment like that this morning. Raising her head, she was confronted by the sight of Stacia Toomey's broad back looming before her. Stacia stood stately and proud, tightly wrapped in a coat of royal blue gabardine. That is The Coast Road by Alan Murren, published in the United States by Harper Via. Then, The Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange. I loved They're There, which was Tommy Orange's previous book, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. This book isn't quite a sequel to They're There, although aspects of it do pick up on the plot. It deals with the histories and the presence and the futures, I guess, if you're from There, of families that appeared in There. It also deals with the history of like Indian schools and the attempted eradication of Native culture in the United States. So I am intrigued, and I feel like I want to reread There before I do Wandering Stars, but hopefully I will be able to get that out of the way soon so I can catch up with where this book is. And this is published by Knopf. We've got a family tree. You know I love that. Part 1, Before 1924. Jude Starr, Winter. Chapter 1, Young Ghosts. That's a lot to get through before we could start the book. I thought I heard birds that morning time, just before morning light, after I shot up scared of men so white they were blue. I'd been having dreams of blue men with blue breath, and the sound of birds was the slow squeaking of wheels, the rolling of mountain howitzers approaching our camp at dawn. That is Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange. The final book that I've read was Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. We actually got this after Joel had finished it, and I can't remember if I had actually started it yet at that point, but I did finish it not long after we got it. We just didn't realize that this book had been released in paperback, so we grabbed a copy at Montana Book Company. This book is adorable, and the premise of it is that you have Emma and Justin. Justin has a post online that goes viral about how his friends call him the good luck charm because anytime he dates a woman and they break up, that woman will then meet her one true love and end up getting married. So that post goes viral, and the same thing has been happening to Emma. So she kind of sends him a message, and they start joking about how weird it is that this keeps happening to them. And then they sort of get the idea, well, if we dated just for the summer, theoretically, at the end of the summer, when we break up, we'll meet our soulmate. So they agree to fake date for the summer with the hope that at the end of it, they will meet their one true love. There's a lot of serious stuff in here as well, and I really appreciated this. I talked about this a lot at in my last Friday Reads video because I had just finished it then. I thought this was really great. Emma is a former foster kid, for one thing. It's just a really delightful book, and I love the connection and the chemistry between Emma and Justin. The audio is really great as well. The prologue is the AITA, like the Am I the Jerk post on Reddit. So we're just going to go to chapter 1, Emma. Have you seen this? My best friend tilted her phone so I could see what she was talking about. There was a black Reddit AITA thread taking up the screen. We were in the hospital cafeteria on our lunch break. What is it? I said, squeezing ketchup on my fries. Just read it, she said. I'm sending you the link. She thumbed it in, and it came through. I picked up my drink and held the straw of my iced tea between my teeth while I read. The moment I hit the second paragraph, my eyes went wide. Oh my God, I breathed. That's Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez, published by Forever. I hadn't realized that Abby Jimenez has published so many books and that this is actually the third in a slightly linked series. And I will say, I don't think you need to have read the previous two because clearly I hadn't. And it turns out some of the characters who pop up in minor roles and some in significant roles in this book have actually been characters or popped up to some small degree in the previous books, in the previous two books in the series. I'm really looking forward to reading more of Abby Jimenez because if this is any indication, she is cinnamon bun magic. And that takes us to The Country Girls, 3 novels and an epilogue by Edna O'Brien. So the 3 novels, I've read The Country Girls, so I've kind of read a portion of this. And the other books are The Lonely Girl, Girls in Their Married Bliss, and an epilogue. It's a trilogy of books and an epilogue. And The Country Girls is sort of a landmark book in Ireland. I did see it all over the place in Ireland, along with a lot of Edna O'Brien's books. But I didn't want to get it there and take it home because it's a bit of a thick book. And I knew I would eventually find it here. So I got this from the same exact edition from the library earlier this year so I could read The Country Girls. And I decided to stop with that one because I wanted to read a bunch of Irish books and authors before going to Ireland. And I decided I wanted to read all of the books on my own time. So part of why this is so landmark in Irish literature, just in literature, is that it talks very frankly about the lives of women. And you start when Kate and Bridget, or Baba, are small, or like young girls, like teenagers in a small village in the west of Ireland in the years following World War II. Kate is a romantic, Baba is a survivor. So they are young in the first book, and then they sort of set off in the world, and you follow their lives, a kind of Elena Ferrante-esque, as they grow up and in the subsequent volumes of it, and see how their lives develop and where they end up. And I've read The Country Girls, and eventually I will get around to the other two. This edition is published by FSG, and let's read just a bit of the opening of The Country Girls. There is an introduction by Eimer McBride as well. Chapter 1. I wakened quickly and sat up in bed abruptly. It is only when I am anxious that I waken easily, and for a minute I did not know why my heart was beating faster than usual. Then I remembered the old reason. He had not come home. It's The Country Girls by Edna O'Brien. The Country Girls is great. Can't wait to read the other two books. Then, Erica, formerly of The Broken Spine, I think the channel still exists, but she doesn't really post there anymore, saw this book in a queer bookstore near where she lives called Little District Books. This is the bookmark that came with this book. And she saw these McNally Editions books and knew that I had been wanting to read Edmund White. So she sent me this one with this racy little cover. And I think it's a racy little book, by the way. Let's see how long it actually is. About 144 pages. So really looking forward to this. And thank you to Erica and this beautiful McNally Editions. First published in 1978, before the trilogy of frankly autobiographical novels that made him famous, Nocturnes for the King of Naples reveals Edmund White at his most poetic, playful, and evocative, a magician on the level of James Salter, James Merrill, or Vladimir Nabokov. And here is how it begins. Chapter 1. A young man leans with one shoulder against the wall, and his slender body remains motionless against the huge open slab of night sky and night water behind him. He is facing the river. Little waves scuttling shoreward from a passing past scow slap against boards. Perfunctory applause. On the other side of the water, lights trace senseless paths across hills, lash marks left by an amateur whip. He turns toward me, a look of hope tempered by discretion, eyes dilated by a longing too large as this briny night panel behind him, to focus in on any single human being. That is the opening of Nocturnes for the King of Naples by Edmund White, with a foreword by Garth Greenwell in that beautiful edition. Okay. Just this morning, I was in my local used bookstore, Book Exchange in Missoula, and I had been keeping an eye on their Montana section to see if and when they would get more Thomas Savage books, because everybody always talks about Power of the Dog. When it's not the Power of the Dog, it's usually The Sheep Queen, and they've usually had copies of those, but I've been waiting for another one because I loved the Power of the Dog. Today, they had The Corner of Rife and Pacific, and I grabbed it because I've been wanting to read more Thomas Savage, and I've just been on the lookout for more. This is an old edition from Morrow. In this book, you return to Grayling, Montana at the beginning of the century, to the tragic Indians, to the great ranchers and citizens of a gentler time who already feel the promise and the threat of the future. And it describes some of the characters, and then you have Anne Chapman, whose beauty is such that a man might never see its like again. Hers is a beauty that confounds and inspires, but more, she has the courage of her blood and defends what she loves by absolutely flouting convention at a time when convention is a dangerous power to flout. So, this was a find just this morning, and I am really looking forward to this. Chapter 1 begins. Grayling, Montana was incorporated at a small celebration in 1890. The first mayor, a man named Rife, was responsible for the fact that the city of Grayling was printed in huge letters on the sides of the new sprinkler wagon, a big cask on wheels, an ambitious title for a community of not yet 1,000 souls, but it was one to live up to. As for Rife, they named a street after him. It's the opening of At the Corner of Rife and Pacific by Thomas Savage. Now, have I mentioned that Ann Patchett has become a huge book influencer for me? She recently talked about Someone by Alice McDermott in one of her Friday videos. So Tuesday they do the Lay Down Diaries. Friday Ann does a video called If You Haven't Read It, It's New to You. And she talked about this book very recently, and Book Exchange had a copy of it. So I ran out and I grabbed it. And it sounds like a simple book, a quiet book. I have enjoyed Alice McDermott's books. It's about 231 pages, so it's not even that long. And it's about the life of Marie Comiford. One life, its devastating pains and unexpected joys, its bursts of brilliant clarity and moments of profound confusion. This is the subject of Someone, Alice McDermott's extraordinary new novel, her first in 7 years at the time. Scattered recollections of a curious childhood, of adolescent sexual awakenings, of motherhood, and finally of old age come together in this resonant story of an unremarkable woman's unforgettable life. I mean, it sounds really fascinating. Here is how this book, which is published by FSG, again, opens. And they actually had a first edition at Book Exchange, which has these beautiful little city graphics on the cover and inside the book. Chapter 1. Pegeen Chehab walked up from the subway in the evening light. Her good spring coat was powder blue. Her shoes were black and covered the insteps of her long feet. Her hat was beige with something dark along the crown, a brown feather or two. There was a certain asymmetry to her shoulders. She had a loping, hunchbacked walk. She had always a bit of black hair along her cheek, straggling to her shoulder, her bun coming undone. That's the opening of Someone by Alice McDermott. This, is, to me, is more of a library builder. I'll get to it when I get to it, but I am very much intrigued. Now I have 2 books by Donald Ryan. He's an author who has been recommended to me for a long time, and I didn't manage to read him before we went to Ireland, so I kind of want to catch up. All We Shall Know was in the sales section of the Book Exchange, so I couldn't really pass up the opportunity to grab it. This one, Melody She is alone and in trouble. At 33 years old, she finds herself pregnant with the child of 17-year-old traveler boy Martin Toppy, and not by her husband Pat. Melody was teaching Martin to read, but now he's gone, and Pat leaves too, full of rage. She's trying to stay in the moment, but the future is looming, while the past won't let her go. It's a good thing that she meets Mary Crothery when she does. Mary is a bold young traveler woman, and she knows more about Melody than she lets on. She might just save Melody's life. This edition is published by Penguin. I've just heard so many good things about Donald Ryan that when I saw this pop up in the sales section, I grabbed it. So I got this for like $2, which, hey, is really great. And again, library builder, I don't intend to run out and read this book, but it will be good to have it when I'm ready for it. The beginning is called Week 12. Martin Toppy is the son of a famous traveler and the father of my unborn child. He's 17, I'm 33. I was his teacher. I'd have killed myself by now if I was brave enough. I don't think it would hurt the baby. His little heart would stop with mine. He wouldn't feel himself leaving one world of darkness for another, his spirit untangling itself from me. That is the kind of bleak beginning of All We Shall Know by Donald Ryan. I've heard so many good things about him. Now, let me just make sure this is not going to topple over because I've been piling stuff sort of willy-nilly over here. The book that had first been recommended to me by Donald Ryan was Strange Flowers. This edition is also published by Penguin. This deals with, in 1973, 20-year-old Moll Gladney takes a morning bus from her rural home in Ireland and disappears. Bewildered and distraught, Paddy and Kit must confront an unbearable prospect that they will never see their daughter again. 5 years later, Moll returns from London. What and who she brings with her will change the course of her family's life and their small town forever. Sounds really fascinating. So, another library builder. I don't have immediate plans to get to this. I'd probably prioritize a bunch of the other ones. But I'm really looking forward to reading Donald Ryan. And this had just turned up today. Again, this is another one I got just this morning as I'm filming this. And we'll get to it at some point. Part 1 is called Genesis. All the light left Paddy Gladney's eyes when his daughter disappeared. All the gladness went from his heart. His days had always been so full of peace. Before Moll went, he pedaled around the parish in the mornings with the post, and he herded and foddered in the afternoons on the farm where he was caretaker. And he walked the fences and checked the gaps and gates, and his wife Kit kept house in their small, tidy cottage, and she did the books for a few local business people, and his daughter, his only child, went to school and learned her lessons, and they knelt every night before bed for the rosary, all three of them. That is how Strange Flowers by Donald Ryan begins. Okay, we're coming to the end. Now, when I got The Country Girls, I got that at a different used bookstore in my area. And sometimes used bookstores have interesting and complicated ways of cashing in credit. So at this bookstore, you can accumulate credit, but if you're making a purchase, you have to pay for the first book. And then you can use credit on any other books that you want. So I purchased The Country Girls, and then I got this book and the next one basically with credit that I had from them. So I got The House of Sand and Fog by Andre Dubus III. This is a book that I have been meaning to read, for such a long time and have not. I have been wanting to read it since before the film adaptation came out, and then I never saw the film adaptation because I wanted to read the book first, and that, that whole mess and how it builds up off of each other. This is published by Vintage. So I admit I probably wouldn't have gotten a copy, except that since I knew I was buying The Country Girls, I knew that I would be able to cash in credit. You just kind of seize that opportunity. So that's exactly what I did with this. Now, in this, I believe the premise is you have a woman named Kathy who was in, I want to say, an abusive relationship. I could be wrong about that. But either way, her house is taken from her. And an Iranian family purchases the house at an auction. There's conflict and tension between them. It is described as a riveting novel of almost unbearable suspense. And I've heard a lot of really great things about this book over the years, so I figured since I had the opportunity, I might as well get it. The book begins, "The fat one, the radish Torres, he calls me Camel because I am Persian and because I can bear this August sun longer than the Chinese and the Panamanians and even the little Vietnamese Tron. He works very quickly without rest, but when Torres stops the orange highway truck in front of the crew, Tran hurries for his paper cup of water with the rest of them." That is the beginning of House of Sand and Fog by Andre Dubus III. The other book I got, I admit it has a bit of a question mark because I don't know how likely I am to read this. It would definitely be a library builder, but I have been wanting to read Elizabeth McCracken for a while because I keep hearing good things. And since I had this opportunity to cash in credit and get this book essentially, I mean, not really for free because it's credit, but I grabbed a copy of The Souvenir Museum, which is a story collection by Elizabeth McCracken. She's supposed to be really good at short stories. Sounds a little bit like quirky and potentially odd, but I'm all for that. This is published by Echo. In these stories, the mysterious bonds of family are tested, transformed, fractured, and fortified. And with sentences that crackle and spark and showcase her trademark wit, McCracken traces how our closely held desires for intimacy, atonement, comfort, bloom and wither against the indifferent passing of time. Which does sound interesting. So the first story is called The Irish Wedding, and it begins, "Because Jack didn't drive, not stick, not on the left side of the road, not at all, ever, Sadie piloted the rental car from the Dublin airport to the wedding, grinding gears and scraping along the greenery, and for a few miles, creeping behind a tractor on a winding road. It was 10 p.m. and raining. If Ireland was emerald, she couldn't say. The tractor was a comfort, lit up with white lights, which she planned to follow as long as she could, till dawn, if necessary." That is the opening story, or the opening of the opening story in The Souvenir Museum by Elizabeth McCracken. Two more. both from the Pulitzer family of authors. First is Elizabeth Strout. She feels like an author I would really like to catch up to. I've only read Olive Kitteridge and the Burgess Boys, and she might be an author I become a completist about at some point. So Amy and Isabel was her first book, and this was actually for sale at my library for $1, so I wasn't going to pass that up. This is published by Vintage as well. A lot of vintage books, a lot of FSG books in this. In most ways, Isabel and Amy are like any mother and her 16-year-old daughter, a fierce mix of love and loathing exchanged in their every glance. That they eat, sleep, and work side by side in the gossip-ridden mill town of Shirley Falls only increases the tension. And just when it appears things can't get any worse, Amy's sexuality begins to unfold, causing a vast and icy rift between mother and daughter that will remain unbridgeable unless Isabel examines her own secretive and shameful past. Elizabeth Strout is an author that I just constantly hear good things about, and she sort of built a series of connected books at this point, so someday I might become a completist about that. So this library builder, again, I don't have immediate plans to get to this book. I would probably reread Olive Kitteridge first, for one thing, but at some point I might become a completist about getting through her work. Chapter 1. It was terribly hot that summer Mr. Robertson left town, and for a long while the river seemed dead. Just a dead brown snake of a thing lying flat through the center of town, dirty yellow foam collecting at its edge. Strangers driving by on the turnpike rolled up their windows at the gagging, sulphurous smell, and wondered how anyone would live with that kind of stench coming from the river and the mill. But the people who lived in Shirley Falls were used to it, and even in the awful heat it was only noticeable when you first woke up. No, they didn't particularly mind the smell. That is the opening of Amy and Isabel by Elizabeth Strout. And then the final book, also from someone in the Pulitzer family of authors, I should mention Elizabeth Strout won a Pulitzer for Olive Kitteridge, Celestial Navigation by Ann Tyler, who won a Pulitzer Prize for breathing lessons, and I finally got around to reading Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant at the end of last year, and I loved that book. So when I read that, somebody mentioned that their favorite Ann Tyler was Celestial Navigation, and I had been watching at Book Exchange, my local used bookstore, to see if and when it would show up, and it did this month, so I grabbed a copy of it. 38-year-old Jeremy Pauling has never left home. He lives on the top floor of a Baltimore row house where he creates collages of little people snipped from wrapping paper. His only company is his elderly mother, who lives beneath him. But after the death of his mother and at a loss, Jeremy agrees to accept the mysterious yet compassionate Mary Tell and her child as new tenants. Like one of his paper creations, Jeremy is fragile and easily torn, and Mary is unaware of how much courage it takes Jeremy to even look her in the eye. Over time, Mary pushes Jeremy to explore beyond the boundaries of his cloistered existence, even if that includes the wonderful and terrifying adventure of falling in love. This is another vintage book, and here is how it begins. Fall 1960, Amanda. My brother Jeremy is a 38-year-old bachelor who never did leave home. Long ago, we gave up expecting very much of him, but still, he is the last man in our family, and you would think that in time of tragedy he might pull himself together and take over a few of the responsibilities. Well, he didn't. That is how we open Celestial Navigation by Ann Tyler, and there you have it. That is the large, massive, huge, wildly irresponsible, maybe, book haul that I did in the month of July. Let me know if you have feedback about any of these books, any that you think I should prioritize, all of that in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.